News. New York City.
The FAQ NYC podcast getting more and more interesting by the minute.
FAQ.
It's FAQ NYC, the New Yorkers podcast from the newsroom by and for New Yorkers, the city. I'm Christina Greer here with Harry Siegel. Hello, Harry Siegel.
Hello, Professor Greer.
Let's jump right in with some of the news from another jam-packed week in New York City.
All right, let's do this real quick. It's going to rain again this weekend. That will be 7 straight weekends of rain. Make it stop. Speaking of making it stop, Eric Adams. AI avatar Eric Adams, we learned at a press conference yesterday, has been on the phone with New Yorkers, talking Spanish, in Mandarin, various other languages.
Hola, soy el alcalde Eric Adams. Queremos invitarlo a venir a trabajar con la ciudad de Nueva York y ayudar a hacer que esta gran ciudad sea aún mejor.
Adams says this is a fine and good use of this new tool to communicate with New Yorkers. Adams, by the way, speaks only English. We will see. It's weird, and frankly, it does not sound very much like Eric Adams. AI, you've got more work to do. Moving on to somewhat more serious news, Republican council member Inna Vernikov, as some listeners will know, came to a pro-Palestinian protest that was held just outside the Brooklyn College campus last week. And she came there with a gun, which she has a license for, as she was counter-protesting, said protesters. She had to turn herself in the next day to the NYPD because even though she's a licensed holder, you can't bring a gun to a protest for the purpose of intimidating under New York's now much more permissive gun laws, thanks to the Supreme Court. That would have been that and sort of a side note or distraction story, except that Ingrid Lewis-Martin, the mayor's closest advisor, met with Erna and was photographed having tea with her. City Hall said running city government requires meeting with lots of sorts, but as elected officials, we should be leading by example, and we've been clear that her decision to bring a gun to a protest was unacceptable. But this comes, of course, right after Ingrid said we need to shut the border. City Hall had to walk away from that one, too. So there's some weirdness with what's going on there. Chrissy, we're going to head right back to that, but I do also want to mention, and we'll also get into the new policy City Hall announced yesterday, a 2-part policy for migrant families, which, by the way, are the vast majority of the migrants who are here. We're not just single adults or with children. Those who are presently in city shelters are going to get 60-day notices that they have to leave and then can, get evicted and can reapply. Additionally, any new migrants who come very shortly are going to be sent families to Floyd Bennett Field and the new big tent that can hold about 2,000 people that's getting set up there. If this happens, and there's some questions, for instance, if the city can send these notices out to shelters that are overseen by DHS, which is where most of the migrant families are, it seems like they would need state permission to send the notices, although they could simply have people leave. So there's some questions here about how this will play out and for who exactly and on what time frame. But in brief, the city has announced that it intends to put families into what it calls semi-congregate settings, and what on a plan look at them are dormitory settings for the first time since the 1980s. The city stopped doing this because of legal obligations and also because it was pretty clear that there was a lot of space for children to be tampered with and abused when that happened. But here we are. Chrissy, it's been a news whirlwind. Maybe let's just start with Ingrid for a moment and what's happening here. It does feel almost Trumpy to me with who's running things.
Yeah, well, I want to scoot back to the AI stuff really quickly, just because Albert Fox-Khan, who's a friend of the podcast, said some great stuff in the city about this feeling Orwellian and problematic. And I have issues with the AI. I think sort of race and tech is going to be a huge conversation that we need to have and probably won't have. I'm still complaining because I can't get water out the faucets when I go to a public restroom. So we have a lot to learn when it comes to AI and race, but I don't like this idea of it being the mayor doing this. And I know it doesn't fully sound like his voice. I think maybe I would feel more comfortable if it were just a voice, right? You hire an actor whose voice you use, sort of like the voice of the subway or whatever it may be. But this idea that it's Eric Adams making these robocalls when it's clearly not Eric Adams making the robocalls, I don't understand why it needs to be him. Why can't it just be someone who represents the city? Or don't we have people on the payroll who speak various languages? Like, I don't understand how difficult it is to do spots. We've always done spots in various languages. So I know it's probably faster to do it via AI, but it still makes me very uncomfortable, especially where we are right now and the lack of conversations. I mean, we know that there's not enough gender equity and class diversity and racial equity and diversity within this space. So these types of swift moves, and we know that Eric Adams, he's one of those people I would call like an early adapter. Remember, he took his first 2 paychecks in crypto. I think he likes to sort of do things on the cutting edge, which on the one hand is interesting as a leader, right? You want to be innovative, but on the other hand, it's like this to me seems a little scary. So there's that. And then Ingrid, I just feel like sometimes timing is everything. So it's one thing to have tea with Ina Vernikov, but do you have it right after she brought a gun to a rally to intimidate people? Like, I just feel like it's another way that the administration thumbs their noses to, I think, a large swath of New Yorkers. And it's like, we roll with Republicans. Yeah, in the picture.
You can have a meeting and be like, let's not take a picture of us raising our tea glasses.
Yeah. So it felt a little like, this is what it is, kids, get into it. And we know that the mayor was once a Republican. Fine. We know that he has strong Republican sympathies, right? He goes on their podcast, not ours. And we'll, pal around. And listen, some would say he's the mayor of all New Yorkers. He can't just be a mayor for Democrats. Sure thing. But is this the time for you to show your loyalty to a Republican city council member who just got arrested, turned herself in because she brought a gun specifically to intimidate other New Yorkers? Like, that to me just seems like poor timing and poor taste. That's the title of this episode. Because it's like poor timing, poor taste for shutting off migrant families in shelters. Poor timing and poor taste for Ingrid and Ina having tea after this woman has brought a gun to intimidate others, right? Poor timing and poor taste for this AI nonsense where you're essentially fronting like you're speaking, Spanish and Mandarin. Like, what are we doing?
So part of Adams' argument for that, and going back to these questions of how identities are represented from this AI. And of course, there's the whole G.I. Geo, garbage in, garbage out phenomena, where a large language learning model that is picking up what it's learning from massive human input is going to repeat all the issues of humanity. But Adams is arguing that look, this is a way of having government able to communicate directly with constituents and in his own voice, and as the second Black mayor, and that there's something useful and healthy about that. And to be fair, the AI voice is so slightly absurd, does not really sound like Adams. It's hard for me to really imagine at this point, and obviously the technology can change quick, that many people being like, oh man, that voice was clearly Adams. Although it does give me some credit, force me to give some credit to like Mike Bloomberg. And I reached out to El Bloombito just to see if she, the person behind that feed, wanted to comment here for at least, trying to communicate that way. This administration, they have in their transcripts, when people speak Spanish, just in brackets, conversation in Spanish. Yes. Apparently they don't have no one to translate those parts or just to write them down.
Right. I mean, I think, what was that? Was it the Grammys when Bad Bunny won a lot of awards and he spoke in Spanish, and people were like, wait a minute, this is the Grammys. Like, how are you just going to put in closed caption, speaking Spanish? Like, that's wholly inappropriate when, you have it doesn't matter if it's not a Latin category or whatever the antiquated terms they still use for the Grammys, but like, we clearly need to evolve with our language comprehension and accessibility and acceptance and all the things. I think a lot of people, not all, I do think a lot of people would agree with that, right? Like, we need to be more expansive. But the fact that the mayor has to use his voice, and maybe it goes to that kind of larger ego that we talk in and around on this podcast with the mayor, where it's just like, does it need to be Eric Adams' voice, or can it just be a voice? It's interesting, though, also, Harry, I listened to our podcast episode 68 for this project I'm working on when we interviewed Eric Adams when he was then borough president. And it was fascinating the number of times he referred to himself in third person. Now, I've worked on a few things. My New Year's resolutions, right? Patience, not judging Black people who wear colored contacts. And another one is not judging people who speak in third person. But it was really fascinating because it's almost like a disconnect. It's like he's talking about a person that is himself, but there's like a distance there. It was really, I implore our listeners to just Google episode 68 when we talk to then undeclared Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President.
You go to the city.nyc and find this episode. We'll have it linked in the notes. But Harry Siegel has some thoughts on Eric Adams, speaking about Eric Adams, and episode 68, going back to Vernikov. Part of why Adams was there was he was talking a bunch at the time about how good it would be to have law enforcement and retired law enforcement folks bring their firearms with them when they go into houses of worship, to their church, their synagogue, their mosque, whatever as the case may be.
That's what the episode was about, because it was after the Pittsburgh massacre, remember?
Yep. And some of those ideas are circulating now. Vernikov, as it was explained to me by someone in contact with her, shit the bed here because she did not know the law. And it's very important, if you want to say, I'm a responsible licensed gun holder and I know the law, to get that right about not being allowed to bring a gun to a protest for the purpose of intimidation. It turns out she did know you can't bring a gun on campus, as it was expressed to me from someone who'd been in contact with her. But that's really off and embarrassing. When Adams brought this up, and it got a fair amount of pushback and controversy at the time, and we spoke with him about this. He also said he'd fire his security detail. He'd carry a gun himself. He since said he would not do that, has not done that. But I expect that you're going to be seeing those arguments coming up again and being raised in less ridiculous ways. And that this has something to do with Ingrid and presumably Eric's sympathies with Vernikov at this point, or if not the mayor and city hall, at least his chief advisor. There are going to be strange and interesting conversations with very new firearms laws here that people haven't quite figured out or caught on to yet, but a ton of new applications about whether people can and should need to try to protect themselves and be armed against aggressors and against dangers. And the last thing I'll say is probably 6 months ago now, but there was a survey out about how safe New Yorkers did or didn't feel, and they said they didn't feel safe, and Adam said that wasn't fair. But one of the standout numbers in that was, from memory, but I assure you very close, roughly 70% of New Yorkers said that they were somewhat or very concerned about a mass attack of some sort in the cities targeting a specific group. 70%.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of those concerns feel elevated and escalated now, and I think are going to over this next stretch of time. So, I'm holding my breath and hoping for the best, but we're in a scary new world here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely think that the level of anxiety for people is on high alert, right? And I don't see it going down anytime soon, which sort of brings me to a question that, I posed to you. This was a question that Bradley Tusk, friend of the podcast and co-creator of the Gotham Book Prize, posed, which was, does this city need a city manager? And, I've always toyed with the idea with my students about, should we have a president and a prime minister in the United States? Someone who actually gets the work done, and then someone who goes around the country and makes sure everyone's feeling good. Because we're such a global nation, we have like some real domestic issues and we have some real international issues. And because we don't have a distinct role of a vice president, it's like, should we have a president, a prime minister, and someone who's, kind of like an ambassador of sorts, and then another person who's like in the office getting work done, and we don't need to see you, pardoning turkeys and rolling Easter eggs, But I think that I've been kind of thinking about this idea ever since it was posed, which is like, okay, so obviously the person would be unelected, right? Because having an elected person sort of defeats the purpose, I guess. But like, we sort of lucked out with Bloomberg being a technocrat. And I've become kinder to him in the distance because I like some of the long-term planning he did. But it's like, this man's racial and class blind spots were beyond, right? Shout out to Kathy Black and that appointment. That was a total disaster. So, but I'm like, so how would we elect this person, or how would we nominate this person? Is it a committee? But I do wonder if the city of New York, because we're such a global city, needs, is that the role of a deputy mayor? I guess. Is that Phil Banks? What?
Oh no.
Is he the manager? If so, this ragtag team is on the outs.
Ooh.
So I don't know. But
tune into the Phil Banks show every Friday, folks. 22 listeners.
22 unindicted co-conspirators.
And of course, you're welcome on our pod anytime if you'd like to reach a larger invested audience, Mr. Banks.
My introduction to Phil Banks was him telling me that stop and frisk was a figment of my imagination.
You see, I just wrote a column called "Eric Adams is Borough President of the World" about his trip south of the border, right? And there is this split between being on stage and performing as a leader and administering a city. I think fundamentally, Bloomberg is exceptional a whole number of ways, not least because his wealth just distorts all the ordinary political flows.
You're correct.
But having a mayor who's able to assign and lead the right people is pretty central there. Adams has argued he's done that. I think one of the issues is he's a good performer and a good frontman, and he's pretty fast on his feet. And in the course of being fast on his feet, he often seems to be almost making up policy on the fly. Whereas as de Blasio, who's like talking through gritted teeth most of the time and just repeating the same script lines and knew exactly what he would and wouldn't say, that was frustrating. This is problematic in other ways. It's hard to let other people actually run your departments and execute the policies you're after and the vision you've laid out when you're riffing, and it's impacting what these folks can actually do and how. But this is plainly a moment for operations, and it's not clear how well those are functioning. And at a time when the government is shrinking, when many people are coming in, and there's sort of really unique challenges coming up, and just being a front person plainly isn't going to be enough. At the same time, it's really important as that front person that you come out before a storm and say, hey, here's what's up. You need to watch out. And that if you mess that up once, which he did, and he won't admit he did it, but his implicit response has been pretty obvious, that you learn from that and that you handle that part of the job right too. And okay, next storm, I've got to do this. I got to have my people out. That's just part of the drill. And so I'm just hoping he's really wants to succeed, has been dealt a tough hand that he asked for, that he's picking up, absorbing, and learning from all these lessons, including the ones he can't publicly acknowledge.
Listen, we want the man to succeed. I do firmly, some of my close friends disagree with me, but I do firmly believe that Eric Adams loves New York City and loves Black people. I do. And so I'm rooting for him because, we're all on this train together. But I think it goes back to the consistent question we ask on this podcast. is it a problem of communication? Is it a problem of organization? Or is it a problem of both? And I do think that there's a problem of organization because I think de Blasio hired really good people and didn't listen to him. He's like the least smart person in the room and thinks he's the smartest, right? I think Bloomberg hired really smart people, but had some crazy blind spots. He himself and the people he hired. So they're good at the thing that they do, but I don't think that there was enough kind of intellectual diversity around him in a lot of ways. Eric Adams, I feel like the verdict is still out on the team that he's assembled. And I think that Eric Adams knows the city. He knows the city very, very well. He's been in it. He's like, kind of like our first real New Yorker president in like a long time, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, right? Because they're used to these kind of Boston-esque, not real New Yorker low keys. But
you said president, but we're definitely talking mayors here. We just had a New York president, and that was a whole other can of worms.
Mayor. Oh gosh, what kind of Freudian nonsense? Let me look through my book, see when I'm scheduled for therapy. So Adams as, oh my gosh, yeah, Adams as president. Wow, Adams as mayor. I feel like my verdict, at least, is still out on the team that he's assembled, and this little, tea party that was last week with gun-toting city council members makes me really question what kind of team he has assembled and what their goal is. But then again, it's like, thus far,
part of it's beating back the far left, right?
Yeah.
And he said this very openly and sometimes got way out ahead of his skis. Like, after communicating, I thought, very well after the terror attack in Israel in a lot of ways. Right after I wrote a thing praising him for a change, he went on MSNBC and said, I saw the DSA people out marching with swastikas. It's like, no, none of that is true or accurate. It's like he can't help himself on some level.
This is Trumpian, right? This is Donald Trump saying on Fox News right after 9/11, I saw terrorists dancing on rooftops. And it's just, listen, this article that I'm writing that needs to get out of my head and onto paper, but like, it fundamentally starts with what my grandmother always said. If you lie, you cheat. If you cheat, you steal. If you steal, you lie. They're all the same. If you do one, you do all three. And so it does make me nervous if someone lies, whether it's major or minor. Because if you minor lie, you major lie. If you major lie, you minor lie. And if my grandmother's correct, which I know she was in all things, if you lie, you cheat, and if you cheat, you steal. So then that opens up a whole new can of worms. And now I have other concerns about the mayor, his friends, and where we're going as a city.
Oh, indeed. And just staying with family here for a minute, when Trump started talking about how he saw with his own eyes thousands and thousands of people cheering as that building, the World Trade Center, was coming down in Jersey City on 9/11. Which didn't happen, just to be clear.
Is that when he said he saw Nancy Pelosi dancing in the streets of Chinatown? He's insane.
Oh, man, scorecard. But he did. He insisted he saw it. And then that was when he ended up mocking the disabled Times reporter who'd asked about it. He just lower and lower. And then he tweeted something out, actually Trump, in defense of the indefensible, simply untrue stuff he was saying. From my dad, Fred Siegel, who mentioned in passing and in an op-ed, Trump called it an editorial, not even a sentence, a clause about some people celebrating in Paterson, which by various accounts was true. And this was like a dozen people. Trump said there were thousands and thousands of people. I saw them with my own eyes, and this thing proves it. Just speaking of, how why you cheat. Still, like one thing leads to the next, and this becomes absurd. And to bring this back to Adams, I thought he was perfectly right within his rights and definitely aligned with popular opinion to be like, what is going on with this protest for the Palestinians immediately after the attack that the DSA's Twitter feed put its imprimatur on? I thought that was horribly off. Said, these people need to examine where they're at. I think a lot of them actually did, without, again, fully acknowledging, because politicians don't do that anymore. It's a shame. Mm-hmm. But again, to then go on national television and just give an essentially false narrative of what happened, who put the event on, what people were like there, and so on is appalling. And what's more, totally unnecessary. You already have the stronger side of this. And going back to him as a Republican, one of the things he is fundamentally after is stopping those people on the left of the Democratic Party, who I write critically about all the time, and in many ways very suspicious of it, and in alignment with him. I think they often don't accomplish what they say they're going to. And that's a real issue, but like this was just such a remarkable cheap shot, and it's an indicator of who your final enemies are and who you're going to go out of your way and not just take clean hits to target and go after.
Right, but I think, Harry, isn't that what we're always talking about on this podcast together? Like, the mayor does something, and we're like, okay, like we can work with it, and then it's like, here we go, bridge too far. Like it's. Everything, I always joke, it's like everything's like a Spike Lee movie, like 30 minutes too long, right? So it's like, or like a New Yorker article. I'm like, wrap it up, B. It's like 3 pages too long. What are we doing? That main article in the New Yorker where I'm like, okay, does it even need to be 9 pages? No, you could have done this in 6. So I feel like Eric Adams is that where it's like, we're with you. And then he says either one extra thing or does something where it's just like, now I can't be with you, right? It's like, I'm about to use an example that I will not use. I will text it to you later. But
subscribe to our Patreon for
right?
bonus dangerous content. Kidding. And Chrissy, on that note, for real,
yes.
we're not going to be the New Yorker or Eric Adams. We're going to hit all these topics again. Oh my.
Think about a Spike Lee movie. And I love Spike Lee. I got to go see that exhibit at Brooklyn Museum. But everything's like 25, 30 minutes too long.
The last 12 minutes of 25th Hour, which is just a fantastic movie.
Fantastic.
Like, why?
Jungle Fever. I'm like, you know what? Edit this just a little bit. I feel like my favorite Spike Lee movie, though, which is, I think this one is 12 minutes too long. School Days. I love a good musical. It's great. Colorism, HBCUs, it's got a lot going on and I love it. But every single movie is a little bit too long. So I guess that means we need to wrap it up, B.
Go on.
Bye.
FAQ.
This has been FAQ NYC. We're part of The City, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to hard-hitting reporting that serves the people of New York. Our work is freely available to everyone at thecity.nyc and is supported by listeners and readers like you. Go to thecity.nyc/give if you'd like to pitch in. We also receive support from P&T Knitwear, an independent bookstore, cafe, and event space on Manhattan's Lower East Side, with a podcast studio that can be freely reserved for community use. We're a proud member of the Brickhouse Cooperative of Independent Journalists, Critics, and Artists. Find it all at popula.com and are affiliated with the Colin Powell School at CUNY's City College, where I am one of the inaugural fellows. Our hosts for this episode were me, myself, Christina Greer, and Harry Siegel, who's also our executive producer. Our engineer is Adam Camara. Thank you all for listening, joining us, making it this far. Be kind, be cool, be warm, and we'll be back soon with more.